if you quit now, it will always be easier to quit. So either it's sports, the first time's the hardest, the second time's then, and then he would always say, like, you're strong, you're courageous, you're Newman, you're one of a kind. Best of all, Eric, if you beat cancer, there's nothing in this world that you can't do.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another inspiring episode of the No Labels, No Limits podcast. And as always, I'm your host, Sarah Box, and I serve as your guide on this journey of discovery and transformation. Today, we are joined by a truly remarkable guest, Eric Newman, founder of Rock Solid Foundation. And from battling pediatric cancer to spearheading initiatives that bring joy to children who are facing similar battles, his story is a testament to the power of resilience and hope. Eric's nonprofit works closely with over 160 children's hospitals across the U.S., providing support and creating moments of joy for children and families grappling with cancer. And his personal and professional life are driven by a mission to transform pain into hope and action. So you can see why he's a great guest for the No Labels, No Limits podcast. And he has some very helpful and interesting insights on going from the entrepreneurial world into the nonprofit world and just the mindset shifts that make both successful. So join me and Eric as we dive into our conversation about turning personal trials and triumphs and his transformative power of community support and ongoing mission to spread hope and joy. So with that, let me formally welcome Eric Newman to the No Labels, No Limits podcast. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And as you and I were chit-chatting about things not related to the podcast before, I know that you will bring great energy and insights into the story, especially, and you don't have to tell the reason you said this at the moment, but especially when you called yourself the Johnny Cash bad boy of nonprofits. So that's my little teaser for folks. Hang in there. There's a reason Eric says that. But I would like to start kind of at the beginning, or a part of the beginning, because you turned a profoundly personal challenge into a catalyst for change, not just for yourself, but for hundreds and thousands of others. So can you share with us what that was like?
Sure. I've always been an entrepreneur. I was the kid in fourth grade selling blow pops and candy in one backpack, had my books in the other. So entrepreneurial mindset. And then also with that, I'm a childhood cancer survivor. So when I was 3 years old, I was diagnosed with pediatric cancer. And through that's the reason pediatric cancer that I hold so close to my heart. But through that journey, I know exactly what these families are going through. But also at the same hand, I lost 2 first cousins to this horrible disease. So I hate everything about cancer. I love everything about the community it produces, but I hate everything about cancer. And so fast forward a little bit more with me being a cancer survivor that would want me to give back to the cancer community. That's not where this story started. Entrepreneur, started my first business at 16, sold that, started a construction company. And in 2008, ended up losing everything that the world said I should have. And when I lost everything the world said I should have, the world was nowhere to be found to help me. So I did what any responsible businessman would do, is I drained my bank account and moved to Costa Rica. I'm a big time surfer, big time dreamer. And so while I was there, I wrote down a simple word, hope, on a piece of paper. And really the reality of where I'm sitting, this is 15 years down the road. I took my cancer knowledge and my construction knowledge and my entrepreneurial knowledge, married those together. And now I'm sitting here. Rock Solid Foundation started in 2009 to love and serve the pediatric cancer community. And we have been trying to break the mold ever since of the nonprofit world.
So you've made it 15 years as a nonprofit already, which is on its own an accomplishment, because many don't make it past 3 or 4, or they're just constantly just eking by. So what are a couple of your main initiatives of Rock Solid?
Yeah, so we have two main initiatives. Keep in mind, we're always evolving because I think keeping the same is the death, right, of any type of for-profit, nonprofit. So what we do, one hand is we build play sets for kids fighting cancer. We do that in their backyards. Why we do that in their backyards is kids' immune systems have crashed. They can't go to public parks. And one thing you never have to teach a human to do, anybody hearing my voice right now, you never had to be taught to play. Unfortunately, that's the first thing taken from a child when they are diagnosed with cancer is the ability to play. So we build play sets in their backyard. And when we started Rock Solid, that was our first initiative, the play set campaign. When we started it, companies were laying people off. It was the Great Depression of 2008. And so me and a couple of my buddies were like, well, it has to bounce back. What are people going to be looking to do? And someone said, well, they're going to be looking to build their teams back, build the trust back. So what we did, instead of Rock Solid Foundation setting out to build all these playgrounds, we were like, well, how do we create these environments in the backyard playset builds as team building exercises for companies? And then they'll bring their people out. They build the playset. Rock Solid Foundation is just the middleman. So we did that. We built our first playset in 2009. And we have been, and how we raised the money for that, we sold Krispy Kreme donuts. I have not eaten donuts since then. It gets in your skin. But we did, so we wrapped our heads around something, right? We ordered the material, we invited the people, we had the limo come pick up the kid, and we built the play set in probably it took us 12 hours. Now we can do it in about an hour and a half. But we wrapped our head around it. But what happened when that little girl came around the corner and saw the play set for the first time? Guess what she wasn't thinking about? Cancer. So that's when we wrapped our hearts around it. And so you have to, in this program and in any organization, you got to wrap your head and your heart around it. It's a yes and not a either or. So we built play sets for kids fighting cancer. We've built thousands of them throughout the country. Started, how have we done that? You focus on the one, what you hope to do for the many. And so every family that we build a play set for, it's their first build, majority of the time. And so it's everyone's first build. It's the sponsor, it's the donor, it's the volunteer, it's the staff member, right? So we take the day one mentality approach on every single playset built. And then our other program is that we provide Rock Solid Ready bags to children on the day or close to the day that they're diagnosed. And so where that came from, the day I was diagnosed, my mom didn't have an overnight bag to stay at the hospital, so she couldn't brush her teeth. And so what we've done is that we make sure that no family, and my dad had to leave her on the worst day of her life to go pack an overnight bag, and he forgot half of the stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And so our goal is to eradicate that moment that no family has to split up on that day that their child is diagnosed. So we provide bags to children's hospitals throughout the country. Has his and her toiletries, has a tablet in there for the kids. Why? Because now where they should be on a playground, now this tablet becomes their playground. Also, it has a blanket in there, has a universal cell phone charger, has a battery pack for their cell phone. It's a survival pack for the first 72 hours. And then after that, what happens is the families then take it home and put their necessities, and then that stays in the trunk of the car or by the back door, because when a child spikes a fever with cancer, they are immediately admitted. Well, now this bag is a part of their journey for the entire journey. So we started with one hospital with one bag. And now we're partnered with, I think, over 180 hospitals throughout the country right now, deploying hope to the pediatric cancer family. This year, we'll send out close to 6,000 bags throughout the country. So
I'm really interested in the logistics of that because that's a lot. You make it sound very simple, first of all.
Yeah, it's not.
And the concept is simple. It is. It's a simple concept that works. I just think about that like, yeah, something happens that's an emergency, you go. You're not thinking, you just go. And just the sense of being able to reuse that bag for like the urgent things that come up, like the fevers and all of that is brilliant. And it also sets the families up for feeling more secure and ready on their own. Right? It's like, okay, we got this. We may not have the cancer journey, but we at least have our own self-care needs and stuff for our child in the moment. But the logistics of doing all of that in all the places around the country, how do you do that? Because you guys, their first builds, when you're doing the first build specifically, but even with this, you have people locally at each hospital you work with. How do your hubs, if that's even the right word, work?
Yeah, so the way it works is we take the end result approach. So what do we want the end result to be? Then we back into it all the way to where we purchase our material from, where we work with vendors, where we get in kind. But the way that it works, we have so Rock Solid Foundation has constantly evolved. Now we're a logistics company, if you really think about it, or organization, sorry. So what we do is we have for the bags and for the play sets. So Rock Solid Foundation does not select the families for the play sets, nor do we select the recipients of the ready bags. We work with the hospitals. They're experts at our clients. And so the better we can love and serve the hospitals, the better that they can love and serve our clients, which my client is to relentlessly, not recklessly, pursue the pediatric cancer community. So we partner with the hospitals. They tell us how many bags they can get at one time. That goes into our system. We teach the hospitals how to give out the bags. And we just don't teach the what, right? We teach the why behind the bag. And Simon Sinek wrote a beautiful book, started this whole evolution of all these people starting with why, right? So we teach the hospitals why the bags exist. And then from there, we train them. They're boots on the ground. And then they give the bags out. I've given out maybe 2 to 3 bags in person, but no human should want to give that bag out. So we give the hospitals. And then when they get the diagnosis, the doctor's walking in to worry about the health of the child. The social worker or the child life specialist is designed, and they walk in with the blue backpack. And so once the families hear that news, they're like, hey, listen, this is for you. This doesn't change the fact that your child has cancer, but it does change how you fight. And so we're the first in. Rock Solid Foundation is the first in, and we're the last to leave. And so and then the play set is kind of mid-road of their journey to where we approach them like, hey, and we go to the hospitals. And then the hospitals, for example, in Dallas, we say, hey, we think we can provide 10 play sets in Cook Children's Hospital in Dallas. So then they identify the kids, they handle all the HIPAA laws, and then from there they submit the only application is name and that they have to have cancer and probably within an age demographic. But we empower the hospitals to make those decisions. And then from there, we have local people on the ground, but also I've studied Navy SEALs. I'm not a Navy SEAL. But we call it ROD, Rock Solid On Demand. We drop a play set and we drop all the tools in a black bin, everything that the team needs on the ground. We almost like parachute it in. And then we have Navy SEALs, our trained people throughout the country, come in, and then they facilitate the builds for the local organizations such as State Farm or XYZ. I just built with Jordan Spieth Foundation. We did a build with the LA Dodgers. So they don't know how to do it. I bring in the SEALs, then we equip them to do the building. So it's a lot of logistics.
Yeah, well, that's what had me curious, right? Because I'm thinking, it sounds, we do this. I'm thinking that takes logistics.
And my team. And I have a phenomenal, beautiful, amazing board, executive team, and the people making the logistic decisions are brilliant at Rock Solid.
So let's talk about your organization structure. It's not a sexy topic, but it's an essential topic for nonprofits, right? And you talked about coming from the entrepreneurial into nonprofits, which have more, I don't want to say they have more regulations. They have different regulations and things that you have to adhere to. One of them is a governing body, right? And a team and certain reporting things. But when you came into this, did you know all of that, or were you starting like, okay, nonprofit, what does it look like? Because you talked about having a great team.
Yes. So that's, I did not, I say this, and Google was a co-founder of Rock Solid, but they didn't give me the money. I Googled, someone called me when I first started this. So now it's very popular for people to do volunteer hours in high school, right? To get into college. That was not a thing, nor I was the guy skipping out on school, cutting grass. Like I was an entrepreneur. I knew that I wasn't going to go to college. So anyways, with that being said, I Googled, someone called me a philanthropist one time when I was starting to talk about this idea. And I kind of jumped at him. I'm like, what'd you call me? Like anything with an ist on the end of it could not be a good thing. So they're like, no, calm down, dude. Like that's it. You want to raise money and give it away. I'm like, oh, okay. So mind you, so I was ignorant, but I think it was a blessing in disguise because I took all of my failures from my construction knowledge, selling a company. I've owned 12 companies, businesses in my life. I just turned 42. The only one that truly worked was the one where I started focusing on the people, not the money. And so from that, I took all those failures, but I had that concept, focus on the people and the money will come. So then I had to Google everything. I Googled how to start a board of directors, and I downloaded, I'm not going to say the nonprofit's bylaws, but I downloaded another nonprofit's bylaws and I put it into Google and I said, hey, highlight everything that has this XYZ name in it. I changed that and put my name there. And then I had about 6 or 7 attorneys tell me that it was a dumb idea, it will never work, worst economy since the Great Depression, and I had no money. I was completely broke. And the one thing that I kept hearing is only millionaires start nonprofits. I'm like, well, you haven't met me yet. All that being said, I started at negative, not ground zero. I would say negative 150. But the difference is that I could clearly identify why I wanted to do it. And it wasn't money. It was to honor my 2 cousins, because at the end of the day, here I was, this guy that lost everything. When I say lost everything, it sounds like a country music song. Lost my dog, lost my fiance, lost my trucks. I felt in Costa Rica, I felt like God had made a mistake keeping me. Shannon was so much better than me, my second cousin. Anyways, I'm trying to get back to the corporate structure. And so we do have a board of directors. I have never been chairman of the board of Rock Solid Foundation, because when I Googled everything about starting a board, I kept reading all these articles about fraud, family foundations, and there's nothing wrong with family foundations, but like you can't have your family members on there because this X,
no, you're absolutely right. And there are
a lot of horror stories, right?
Nonprofits that do that. They want their CEO as a board member. It's like, well, that's a conflict.
Correct. Now I am a board member. I have a voting right as the founding CEO, but I've never been chair of the board, which meaning I have a boss. I can get fired from something that I started. You talking about a slice of humble pie here? Like, that makes me do my job even better. And now, so before you're like, okay, I worked for free for the organization for 4 years. I was working full time in construction. And then I asked the board for $24,000 for my first salary because I found out we were having a baby. And I promised my wife that their dad wouldn't be born to an unemployed dad. They said no. And so I worked for free for 4 years. And right before I was about to, probably an hour or 5 hours before, the board voted because they had a private donor come in and fund my salary for 2 years. From that, the organization grew 700% once I started getting paid. So we went from about $10,000 a year to then $30,000 a year, and then we went to 100 and some thousand a year. So we have a board of directors. I am the chief play officer of Rock Solid Foundation. The IRS does not recognize that, but I am the CEO, chief play officer of Rock Solid. And I have an executive team, and then I have coordinators, then I have directors and stuff like that. So we have about 26 people that choose to call Rock Solid Foundation their family, and they work here. But for 12 years, and we turned 16, I would say 12 years, we were scratching and clawing, trying to figure this thing out and how to keep it alive. Most overnight successes take about 15 years. So
I agree. I do. I've got a couple of fabulous nonprofits that I work with, but they were scratching the first couple of years. And now if you just met them today, you'd think, wow, they're like the most successful. So we were talking on the phone the other day, we were doing some management conversation, and
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I said, because they had a problem, like they'd gotten this huge donation, $250,000, and then they found out they needed something else done at their bank for investment and that. And I just started laughing. I said, 12 years ago.
That's a good problem. That's a very good problem to have.
I know, but they were like, they're going, we got to do this. And, and I just said, perspective is everything.
1,000%. And you mentioned something as you were teeing up the question about nonprofits have regulations and all, like perspective, right? I think, perception is law. Perception is real. And so nonprofits have a microscope on them, which they should, because there's a lot of wrong being done. But at the end of the day, the way Rock Solid Foundation runs is we run Rock Solid like a Fortune 500 company. The only difference is my shareholders are kids fighting cancer.
Exactly.
So Rock Solid Foundation needs to make as much money for my shareholders. We need to operate a tight P&L. We need to invest in marketing. We need to invest in fundraising. We need to invest the same thing that Fortune 500 companies do. The only difference is my shareholders are kids fighting cancer. And so around me in my office, my meeting rooms and stuff, like I have kids' photos everywhere. Why? Because those are my shareholders. And like every other CEO, yes, you want your customer, but I'm there to represent my shareholders. And so that's the only difference. We run it like a Fortune 500 company. We get audited every year. I have a finance team. I have a beautiful marketing team. I have a sales development team. And then I have an operations team, and they're brilliant.
So that's what you were talking about, the head and heart piece, right? So
Right.
because you really have to be smart about it. And I think oftentimes people will start a nonprofit because it's coming from a personal place, much like your story, right?
Correct.
To honor your cousins and help kids who are going through what you went through. But we have to remember too that it is a business. I mean, if you take nonprofits as a whole, they are a significant part of our economy.
Yes.
As employers and consumers of business, good, all of that stuff. And oftentimes I know folks go, well, we shouldn't invest in that. And I'm thinking, okay, but would you tell your local business they shouldn't do? Oh, no, they need to do that. And I'm going, exactly. Mm-hmm. You do need to make profits because you need to have a healthy bottom line so that if something happened, you could still operate for a year. Would be bonus, right?
Like a pandemic, right? Like if a pandemic happens or it's...
Right. We can no longer say that would never happen. We know it happens, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
But I also,
yeah.
And I think the nonprofits, the great thing about them is they really pivoted quickly when the pandemic hit, because they thought, especially the ones who serve in person. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, okay, we have an obligation to our shareholders, our clients, our families. How can we meet this commitment?
Right.
In a different way? And they didn't have to, I mean, I bet they would have loved to have had a ton of time to think about it, but they didn't have it, right? They had people counting on them, much like you. So,
and cancer didn't stop during the pandemic.
Exactly.
Dealing with homelessness didn't stop. The food crisis in the world didn't stop. And that's my obligation and that's what I said to my team is like, listen, cancer doesn't stop. Neither do we. How do we make this work? And it was a very scary time.
It was scary, but I love the how of it. And I like the entrepreneurial. I mean, honestly, the people who work in nonprofits, you might call them nonprofit employed, but I find them to be some of the most entrepreneurial because they're going, okay, what can we do with this? It might only be this much, but how can we do this much bigger with it? So, I just find it, I'm a big champion of nonprofits. I've run them. I know that you can get overly governed, if you will, but honestly, the change they make in communities, we turn to them and they have a high level of trust in community for the most part, right? People go, okay, I trust my nonprofit to do whatever it is. So how do you, can you share a little bit more on your philosophy of leadership? So you talked about Simon Sinek, operating like a Fortune 500 company. But is that what you use to underpin like sustaining your capacity and building your legacy, or are there other aspects that you really encompass in your leadership, Eric?
Oh yeah, everything rises and falls on the values of the organization. They're not just an eagle poster with some fancy lettering on it. We hire and fire off of our values. We make decisions. In the pandemic, I had everyone write down our values and like, okay, what do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what do we need to do better? Everything rises and falls on our values and our values. So it's family first, theirs and ours. And meaning like I have to give everything we can to the families first. Like I have to make decisions based on the families we're called to love and serve. But where Rock Solid Foundation is different, it's theirs and ours. Like, so if I'm talking to you or I'm talking to my marketing person and she's not good at home, she's no value to Rock Solid Foundation. And so meaning like that's a flipping of the switch with most nonprofits. But I want them to take off and be at their kids' baseball games. Why? Because I do. My whole philosophy in this, and this is my statement, I try to read 100 books a year. That's a good thing and a bad thing. My whole philosophy in all of this, being the founder, is again, start with the end in mind. Who am I? Where am I going? And what do I believe? So I ask myself those. So that's my leading compass to how I lead. But at the end of the day, I become less, they become more. So meaning how, like one day with me doing this right, my wife and I are going to sail off into the sunset and I will hand this over to someone else. How are we building the organization today? What decisions am I making today that will influence and impact the organization 20 years from now? and then backing that way. So I would say I become less, they become more. Who is they? Volunteers, the donors, the staff, my marketing, the specialists, the interns. How do I build them up in such a way that they can act, speak, talk of rock solid value or rock solid foundation? Well, where does all that come from? That comes from your values.
So did you set the values for your organization, or did the organization do that collectively?
No, so it's a yes and. So I sat with the board, and I believe my biggest terminology, if you ever get around me, is brain dump. I'm like, oh, did you do a brain dump on it? Did you brain dump on it? Brain dump, prioritize, organize, and delegate, right? So it's get it out of here, prioritize it. So I can go way down the rabbit hole on that. So it was a yes and. So we started with 13 values. And then now we have 5. Why do we have 5? Because no one can remember 5 of them, let alone 13. So we have values, and then we created something that we call power statements. So we have 5 values, but one of the power statements is, and what is a power statement? Create something that people won't forget and they want to ask a question about. One of the power statements is, I believe that play defeats cancer. What? Right? So it's not a value. It's a power statement that we equipped our teams to be able to communicate with that want people to want more of what we're talking about. So it's a yes and then every year, my executive leadership team, we look at our values and we say, hey, does this make sense? Are we staying true to them? Does this need to change? Why? Why do your value, most of the time your values don't need to change, but maybe slight terminology needs to change.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you've got a strong foundation of values, the terminology may change as the team or you're called to serve slightly differently, right? But the essence isn't going to change. So if you think less of you, more of others, that's not going to change, right? How that shows up might change a little bit. Am I on track with you?
Yeah, and yes. And so from that, so for example, when I say it, so our mission statement when we first started was building hope for kids fighting cancer. So now with cancer. So we spent 2 hours on that right there. Now it's building hope for kids fighting cancer. Why did we change fighting and with? Because there's no hope in with, there's hope in fighting. So that's what I'm talking about, where the terminology can change. And the more you focus in on why you exist as an organization, the better. And you've got to fight for simplicity, because right now, simplicity is scalability, simplicity is taken away, not adding to. Yeah. So, I mean, it's constant. I told you it took us 12 hours the first time we ever built a play set. We just partnered with a NASCAR team, and they did it in an hour and 1 minute. And it was safe, and it didn't fall apart. But the only way it was able to do that is because we were evaluating and making it simple. And one of our values is respect simplicity.
Yeah, simplicity. I love the question of what's not necessary. You know, I look at even all the stuff I put down going, okay, this is what needs to happen this quarter or whatever we're doing. And I'm thinking, really? What's not necessary? And all of a sudden you're going, all right. And then there's space. There's space to get better at what you're doing. Or something comes up and you're saying, okay, we could do that with the NASCAR team because we have time or space to add that in. We're not having to somehow hurt some other aspect of the business in doing it.
Yep.
So you've got some great, for a Google-defined nonprofit, you're rocking it, no pun intended on that.
Yeah, a lot of good people. Good people.
So what do you think your own path in facing your own childhood cancer helped you do that helps plant hope in your volunteers and other people who are working with you, because not all of them have been down your path?
Correct. I would say what helps me with that is, or what I've learned the most, I get asked this question a lot. It's the audacity, it's the grit, it's the grind of not quitting. And so I say that, so my parents didn't have a choice to quit when I was going through it. And then I witnessed my aunts and uncles, like you got to think about it. So I was diagnosed at 3, got finished when I was 6, but I had it for the rest of my life. I experienced death at a very young age, which then I think you start to experience life once you experience death. And that's a whole nother journey. I learned how valuable life was at a very early age. But then what I did is I witnessed my mom not quit because she leaned in with my aunts and uncles when they went through it. then I watched my cousins lose their life and fight their you-know-what's off until the very last breath. And sitting there as a boy, then to like a 16-year-old to an 18-year-old, watching all this happen, watching how my family's navigated the pain of all of this. And the one thing that they never did was quit. And my dad told me, there's a long story with it, but my dad told me is like, if you quit now, it will always be easier to quit. So either it's sports, the first time's the hardest, the second time's then, and then he would always say, like, you're strong, you're courageous, you're Newman, you're one of a kind. Best of all, Eric, if you beat cancer, there's nothing in this world that you can't do. So that's me. And so that's from all the people telling me, haters gonna hate. I think Taylor Swift said it best, right? She's a deep theologian, if you've never heard of her. Haters gonna hate, right? So just kidding. But from that, with that mentality, like, I'm not a typical, I go to builds throughout the country now, and I walk onto the build site in flip-flops. I got my kids with me, rocking my LA Dodger hat. I will never announce myself, and I will be the first person to pick up dog poop. Because I think that's what true leadership is. You can call it servant leadership. You can all these mainstream terminologies for it. At the end of the day, all I want to do is love and serve the pediatric cancer community. So to help someone in pig poop, you got to get in pig poop. And so I'm just willing to get it all over me. And I hope other people, by them witnessing me sit in the muck of cancer, they see me doing it. It's not, I'm on builds, I'm on packing party, I'm all over the country doing this, and they see me sitting in this muck. I'm like, hey, if I can do it, they can do it. So I know that's I talk about poop, so just deal.
It fits the conversation.
It's the reality of, I hope that I can inspire one person, which we have, that, man, use your pain for a purpose. If you're listening to this right now, if you go to bed thinking about something, you wake up thinking about something, I would just encourage you, you got to deal with the pain. So find healing any way that you can. But then from that, there is someone sitting in that muck that you have just picked yourself up out of that needs your help. And if yours is rock solid, if yours is dealing with homelessness, addiction, whatever it may be, the willingness to sit with someone in that, and you can sit there and have the difference between sympathy and empathy. Man, that's where true life happens, because you put yourself second and amazing things can happen.
What have your kids learned and taken away from watching you do what you do?
So they've learned a lot. This is so Rock Solid Foundation, it spiked. And then the pandemic was probably one of the best things that ever happened for me and my wife and my family. So I'm an entrepreneur. I am a workaholic, recovering workaholic, whatever you want to call it, passion. What my kids have learned is that, again, I say the same thing very similar to what my dad said, except for, thank God, that if you can beat cancer, there's nothing in this world that you can't do. Every day before I leave, like, I look at my beautiful daughter and say, you're strong, you're courageous, you're one of a kind, you're uniquely made, designed for a moment such as this. Why do I do that? Because one day some punk guy is going to come and be like, daggone girl, you're hot, right? She's like, no, I'm not hot. You know what my daddy said about me? So anyway, like, what they have learned is that daddy's willing, like, I make it, right now it looks like it's fun, but man, I witness kids passing away all the time. It's a feather, right? It's heavy. That Newmans can do anything. But where I rest in all of this is, if I'm not there for my kids, they're not going to care two rips about how many play sets daddy builds for the kids out there if I'm not there for them. And so I think they can see that there is success and you can have significance at the same time. And I'm not willing to sacrifice my family. Right. So it's like, I hope that they see that anything's possible. I've written a couple books. And my daughter dressed up as me on career day. She came downstairs with a hat on and a hooded sweatshirt. I'm like, get that guy. I was like, you can't wear that to school. She's like, it's career day. I'm like, what the heck are you supposed to be? She's like, you. So I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? So I was like, do I really look like that? My wife put some dotted little beard on her. She had my rock solid backpack. So I just hope that they see that anything's possible, that their daddy cares, their daddy tries. And that if they set their mind to it, there's nothing in this world that they can't do.
That's beautiful. And what a great demonstration of living what you believe, for your kids. It's great when you get to that point of you're not willing to sacrifice your family, because it's easy, you know, especially in an early career where someone has said, no, you have to do this. And you're thinking, that's terrible for my family to do that. And I've made those decisions and then thought later, I'm going, to what end? You know, I made money for the company and I harmed, not physically, but I diminished an experience for a family member. So I think it's powerful to do that. And the more I've learned to do that and go, no, I can say no. You know,
well, that's the difference. So my wife, I say this a lot, like before the pandemic, like my marriage was almost not there. It was a very tough time. I would call from California and my wife would be like, hey, listen, it's more of an inconvenience because it's a 3-hour time frame. Like, can you not call? So like, as you're hearing me say this is a constant struggle for me every single day. Why? Because what I do is seen as a great thing in the world, right? And it's easy to say, oh no, I got to do this because of this. But man, and I promise you, if you're listening, I don't have it all figured out. But it has strengthened my relationship with my kids and my wife. As long as you're thinking about it, I think that is what success looks like in that measure.
That's one of the questions I started asking myself too. It's like, where am I getting my validation? Because people love when you do good things in the world, but they don't see the behind the scenes things like, right. Well, where did you fall short? And it's a personal thing. You have to decide for yourself where you're falling short. And the time zone difference, that's a wake up call when your wife says to you, please don't call, it's an inconvenience, right? It's like, or
you're
call when it's good
right.
for us.
Right.
So good for you for hanging in there and not quitting though, and being honest.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is one of the best traits that any leader can have. You can have control or you can have growth. You can't have both. And so if you want to truly grow this thing, you got to be vulnerable. And I do. I'm a control freak. I'm a recovering control freak, right? And my leadership team always says that back to me. Well, you can have control, but you can't have growth. You can't have both. And I'm like, okay, I trust you. So
it's terrible when your own words come back to haunt you too.
Yeah,
like,
man.
No, I get to say that, not you.
And then you start rolling your eyes at them. That's when you know that you've picked it up, when they've picked it up.
So I want you to wrap us up here with something here. So I know we've covered a number of things. And I'd like you to speak to 2 different populations for me.
Okay.
So 2 different things. You don't have to roll it into one thing. But for all the nonprofits, the leaders and teams out there who are, quote unquote, in the fight every day doing what they're doing, what suggestion or thought would you offer them so that 2025 is a great year for them? And then I'll ask you the other question.
I would say for any nonprofit leader out there hearing my voice right now, hey, thank you. You get to be here. You don't have to. You can go do anything else in this world, but what you do truly matters. There's someone right now that is counting on you that will probably never know your name. So for that, I say thank you. The next thing I would say is that please, please, please realize that there is a large world out there that you can start learning from, adapting new technology. And I promise you, take the risk, invest in the marketing, and just make sure you're following your gut, not some old school board structure that's put in place. Now, if you work for the board, that's a little bit different. But I ask you, I beg you to break the mold. Look in the mirror, do some reflection, and break the mold, not because some crazy dude on a podcast told you to, but because there is someone out there depending on you. Don't do it the way that it's always been done. It's a whole new world. I think the mermaids said that best, right? It's a whole new world. I'm not going to sing it, but it's a whole it's a whole world out there.
It is.
Get out of the lane, look around, and be willing to break the mold.
So the flip side of that question is for all of the businesses or potential sponsors listening who might say, well, I don't know about, do I trust nonprofits or they don't run like I do? What do you have to say to them about making a difference?
Yep. I would encourage any potential sponsor, donor, someone identifying and looking to get involved with a nonprofit. Yes, you need to do your due diligence, not telling you not to, Don't just rely on some Google document of some navigator around here that judges charities that have never been to the site to what it is to be produced. You use that as a checkpoint, not the entire thing. I would encourage you to do your due diligence, but before you invest into any nonprofit organization, you need to do your due diligence, but look at the impact, not just the numbers on the spreadsheet. It needs to be a yes and. And so for any nonprofit or any person out there listening, if I were to run Rock Solid Foundation on the margins to what the world has said, which isn't even law by the IRS, you can't sustain a nonprofit. And that's a whole nother soapbox, and I'm trying not to go down that one. But I would just encourage you, look at the impact that organization is making, and what would your gift do to magnify that impact, and then use everything else to help you make your decision. Don't just let one website dictate your decision if you're going to give to that nonprofit or not.
I don't think I could add anything to what you've just said, Eric. So I'm going to leave that be our closing remarks. I'm not sure when this will air. I know you're voting for the Dodgers, so we'll see how the World Series turns out.
Let's go.
So go LA. I can't believe I said that as a Giants fan, but I did. I wish you all the best. Thanks for everything you're doing, and just great success to you. And when your book is ready to come out, get back with me. I'd love to have you come on and talk about your book in 2025.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.